A mafia boss disguised himself as a customer in his own restaurant and froze when he heard 3 words from a pale, exhausted waitress. "You look tired." Just 3 simple words, but they were spoken so naturally that Vincent Moretti froze for a moment, his espresso cup halfway to his lips. No one had ever dared to say something like that to him. Not his enemies, not his allies, not even the men who had pledged their lives to serve him. Yet here was this waitress, staring at him with eyes that held no fear, only quiet observation. The name tag on her worn burgundy apron read Scarlet Hayes, and everything about her, the dark circles under her green eyes, the way her uniform hung loose on her thin frame, the hollowness in her cheeks, told a story of exhaustion that went far deeper than a long shift. But there was something else there too, a flicker of defiance, a spark that refused to die no matter how hard life tried to extinguish it. "Tired," Vincent repeated, genuinely curious. His voice, usually cold enough to make grown men tremble, came out almost soft. "Yeah," she said, resting her notepad against her hip with a half-smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "You have that look. The kind of man who carries the weight of the world but refuses to let anyone see it. The kind who thinks a strong coffee can fix everything." Vincent allowed himself a small smile. "Perhaps it can." "I doubt it," she replied. "The coffee here is strong, but it is not a miracle worker. Trust me. I have been searching for miracles for a long time." She laughed quietly and walked toward the counter, her steps slightly unsteady from what he guessed was working double or triple shifts. He watched her go, something stirring in his chest that he had not felt in years. There was something magnetic about Scarlet Hayes, an energy that did not match the suffocating atmosphere inside Magnolia Bistro. While everyone else moved in fearful silence, terrified of drawing attention, she walked with a quiet rebellion, as if she had already faced the worst life could offer, and decided she would not break. Vincent Moretti had killed men without blinking. He had built an empire on blood and fear. But in that moment, watching an exhausted waitress walk away with her head held high, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago felt something he could not name, and it terrified him more than any enemy ever had. If this story touched your heart, hit that like button and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss another story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Because what Vincent discovers about Scarlet Hayes and the dark secrets hidden within his own restaurant will shake the foundations of his empire. Scarlet had just returned with the coffee pot to refill Vincent's cup when a voice cut through the air like a blade. "Hayes." A middle-aged man with a swollen belly and a flushed red face stepped out from behind the counter with an angry scowl. The name tag on his shirt read, Tony Russo, manager. He moved toward Scarlet with heavy steps, his narrow eyes squinting with malice. "I told you to clear table number 7 20 minutes ago. Or are you deaf now?" Scarlet took a deep breath and turned slowly. "I'm serving a customer, Tony. That's what a server does. Or did you forget?" Tony stepped closer, his face turning purple with rage. "Don't get smart with me, girl. Who do you think you are? Everyone here is sick of your attitude already." The dining room fell into complete silence. The other employees lowered their heads and pretended to be busy, avoiding the confrontation, as if not seeing it meant it didn't exist. Vincent watched everything with eyes as cold as ice. The manager's tone wasn't discipline. It was abuse of power. He was clearly enjoying humiliating someone in public, but Scarlet didn't step back. She lifted her chin, her green eyes burning bright. "I'm doing my job with a little humor," she said, her voice surprisingly calm, "because someone here insists on turning this place into a funeral home." A few nearby customers struggled not to laugh. Tony flushed with embarrassment and stepped even closer, almost pressing his face into Scarlet's. "You should learn to keep your mouth shut and follow orders, girl. Or maybe you want half your pay docked this month. You still owe me last month's advance. Don't forget that." A flash of pain crossed Scarlet's eyes, but she quickly hid it. Vincent's hand tightened on the table, fury rising in his chest. He wanted to stand up, wanted to show this bastard who he was talking to, but he couldn't. Not yet. He was here to observe, to understand, not to break his cover. But what he saw made his anger boil. "Funny, Tony," Scarlet replied, her half-smile still on her lips even though her voice trembled slightly. "Keeping my mouth shut and obeying orders isn't in my job description." Tony's eyes widened. "One more smart remark, Hayes, and you'll be serving coffee out on the sidewalk. Better than serving you," she replied, turning her back on him. Tony looked around and caught Vincent's gaze as if searching for agreement from a customer. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize. Some staff don't understand what respect is." Vincent set his cup down and looked straight into Tony's eyes with a look that his enemies would recognize instantly. "I think the service here is excellent," he said calmly, but there was something in his voice that made Tony swallow. Actually, she's the only one here who truly smiles. Tony opened his mouth to say something but then closed it again. Something in this customer's eyes unsettled him, a danger hidden beneath an ordinary exterior. He turned away, muttered something, and walked into the kitchen. Scarlett exhaled and looked at Vincent. Sorry about that scene. He likes to turn the morning shift into a nightmare. No need to apologize, Vincent replied, his eyes softening when he looked at her. You handled that very well. Oh, I practice every day, she said with a tired smile. If sarcasm were an art form, I'd have a whole collection of trophies by now. She tilted her head and rested the tray on her hip. Would you like more coffee? Only if it comes with another inspirational speech. Scarlett chuckled softly, and for the first time that smile reached her eyes. Then you'll have to pay extra for that. How much? One smile, she answered, and Vincent smiled, truly smiled, perhaps for the first time in weeks. As she walked away, he noticed something else. The energy in the diner changed when Scarlett was nearby. Even under pressure, she made everything feel lighter. Customers seemed more at ease, but there was something else in the air too. Fear. The other employees moved as if walking on glass, their eyes constantly flicking toward the kitchen door, where Tony could appear at any moment. Vincent took a sip of coffee and thought. Magnolia Bistro had a soul, hidden, suffocated, and its name was Scarlett Hayes. The question was who was dimming her light, and why a restaurant that belonged to him was being ruled by fear without him ever knowing it. That night, Vincent didn't go home. He sat in his black sedan, parked a few blocks away from the restaurant, and waited. He didn't know why he was doing this. Vincent Moretti wasn't the kind of man who waited for anyone. He gave orders and other people waited for him, but there was something about Scarlett Hayes that wouldn't let him leave. Maybe it was the way she stood straight in front of Tony even though she was clearly exhausted. Maybe it was the complete lack of fear in her eyes when she looked at him. Or maybe it was what she had said about searching for miracles for a very long time. The clock struck 9 in the evening when Scarlett stepped out of the back door of Magnolia Bistro. She had traded her apron for a thin, worn jacket, and her shoulders were slumped with fatigue. But instead of going home, she almost ran toward the bus stop. Vincent signaled his driver to follow from a distance. The bus took Scarlett to St. Mary's Hospital in the southern part of the city. Vincent watched her walk into the oncology ward, her legs trembling but still pushing forward. He waited outside with a strange feeling rising in his chest. Through the glass, he saw Scarlett sitting beside the bed of an elderly woman, thin and frail, her head wrapped in a scarf to hide the hair loss from chemotherapy. That woman had to be her mother. Scarlett held her mother's hand and said something that made the woman smile weakly. Then she bent down and kissed her mother's forehead, her shoulders shaking as if she were trying to hold back tears. Vincent turned away. He had seen a lot of death in his life, and had caused more than enough of it. But watching a young woman sit beside her dying mother, trying to smile while her world was collapsing, made his chest ache in a way he hadn't expected. 45 minutes later, Scarlett left the hospital, but she didn't go home. She took another bus downtown where she disappeared into a bar called Lucky 7. Vincent stepped out of the car and stood in the shadows, watching through the glass. Scarlett was wearing a black t-shirt from the bar, carrying heavy trays of beer through the noisy crowd. Her face was pale under the neon lights, but she still forced a smile for the customers. Her second shift of the day. It was already 11 at night and she was still working. Vincent stood there for 2 hours watching Scarlett maneuver among drunk men, avoiding rough hands, picking up the small tips with a look of gratitude. At times she had to lean against the wall for a second, close her eyes as if trying to gather what little strength she had left. Then she straightened and kept going. At 1:30 in the morning, Scarlett finished her shift. She stepped out of the bar, counted the few crumpled bills in her hand, her face darkening when she saw how little it was. She stuffed the money into her pocket and started walking. There were no buses running at this hour. Vincent told the driver to follow slowly. Scarlett walked through the dark streets, her shoulders hunched against the cold, her steps unsteady from exhaustion. 15 minutes later, she stopped in front of a run-down building in the western slums of the city. Rusted iron stairs, peeling walls, windows patched with cardboard instead of glass. This was where she lived. But before Scarlett could go inside, a black car pulled up to the curb. 2 large men stepped out and blocked her path. Vincent immediately became alert, his hand already touching the gun at his back. "Where's the money, Hayes?" one of them growled. "Mr. Salvatore says you owe $2,000 this week." Scarlett stepped back, her voice trembling but trying to stay calm. "I only have $500. I'll pay the rest next week." The man sneered. $500. This week's interest is 30%. You owe a total of $12,000 now, sweetheart. How much longer do you want to wait? Or should Mr. Salvatore come visit your mother at the hospital? Scarlett's face went white. She pulled all the money from her pocket and handed it to them with shaking hands. "Please, don't touch my mother. I'll pay. I promise." The man snatched the money, counted it, then spat on the ground in front of her. "Next week the full amount, or don't blame us." The two men got back into the car and vanished into the night. Scarlett stood there for a long moment, her shoulders trembling. Then she slowly sank down onto the step, hugged her knees, and cried without making a sound. Vincent sat in the car, his fists clenched so tightly his knuckles were white. He knew Salvatore, a third-rate loan shark operating on the outskirts that he'd never bothered with. Now he cared. The clock read 2:15 in the morning when Scarlett finally stood up, wiped her tears, and went inside the building. The light in her apartment came on for a moment, and then went dark. Vincent stayed there, staring up at the black window. In his mind, every piece fell into place. That girl was carrying the whole world on her shoulders. A mother with cancer, crushing debt, working herself to exhaustion, and still being humiliated every day by that bastard manager. And yet she still smiled, still held her head high, still joked about searching for miracles. Vincent Moretti had lived 37 years, believing in nothing but power and control. But tonight, watching a 27-year-old woman almost collapse and still refuse to kneel, he felt something inside him change, and he knew what he had to do next. The next morning, Vincent sat in his private office on the top floor of Moretti Tower. The wide glass windows looked out over the whole of Chicago, the city he ruled from the shadows. But today he wasn't looking outside. He was thinking about a slum apartment, a hospital, and a girl crying in the middle of the night. He picked up the phone. "Marco, come to my office. Now." 5 minutes later, Marco DeLuca walked in. 35 years old, tall, with a scarred face and the sharp eyes of a man who had survived countless battles. Marco had been Vincent's right hand for 10 years, the only person Vincent trusted completely. "You called, boss." Vincent turned his chair and looked straight into Marco's eyes. "I need you to do something for me. Create a false identity. The name is Jack Romano, 37 years old, unemployed, looking for a waiter job." Marco blinked, surprise crossing his usually cold face. "A waiter? You said a waiter. That's right. At Magnolia Bistro. I'm going to work there for 1 month." Marco stepped forward, his voice urgent. "Boss, this is too dangerous. The Castellano family is still looking for a chance to strike. If they find you somewhere without protection, they won't miss the opportunity. You can't risk your life like this." Vincent stood up and walked to the window. He looked down at the city below, where millions of people were living lives he had never truly understood. "Reports and numbers don't show me the truth. Marco, I need to see it with my own eyes. I need to understand what's happening from the inside." "What is it about that restaurant that makes you care so much?" Marco asked, his eyes narrowing. "Or is it someone there?" Vincent was silent for a long time. Marco knew his boss too well, could read what wasn't being said. Finally, Vincent turned back. "The manager there, Tony Russo. There's something wrong with him. I want to find out for myself. And there's an employee there. She's in trouble with Salvatore, the loan shark in the West." Marco nodded slowly, his expression showing he understood more than Vincent had said. "Salvatore is a small fish. I can deal with him in one night." "Not yet," Vincent said. "Not now. I don't want her to know. I don't want anyone to know who I am." Marco sighed, knowing that when Vincent had decided no one could change his mind. "Then at least let me arrange covert protection. 2 men watching from a distance, 24 hours a day. If there's any sign of danger, they'll intervene immediately." Vincent nodded. "Fine, but they must be absolutely discreet. No one can notice, especially her." Marco looked at his boss for a long moment, then opened his mouth as if to say something, but stopped. In the end, he only nodded. "I'll prepare everything. Tomorrow, Jack Romano will officially apply for the job." Vincent turned back to the window. "Thank you, Marco." Marco paused at the door and turned back. "Boss, I've followed you for 10 years. I've never seen you care about anyone like this. Whoever she is, I hope she's worth it." Then Marco left, leaving Vincent alone with his thoughts. Vincent stood there, watching the sunrise over the Chicago horizon. He thought about Scarlett Hayes, about her fearless green eyes, about her tired but warm smile, about her tears in the night. He didn't know what he was doing. Vincent Moretti never acted without a clear plan, but this time he only knew that he needed to be closer to her, needed to understand her, needed to do something, anything, so the light in her eyes wouldn't go out. And if that meant taking off the boss's coat and becoming an ordinary waiter, then he was willing. For the first time in 37 years, Vincent Moretti would live like a normal man, and he didn't know that this decision would completely change his life in ways he could never have imagined. The next day, Vincent parked the old sedan Marco had prepared 3 blocks away from the restaurant. He wore faded jeans, a simple white shirt, and worn sneakers. Looking into the rearview mirror, He barely recognized himself. No expensive suit, no Rolex watch, no cold eyes of a boss, only Jack Romano, an unemployed man looking for work. He took a deep breath and walked into Magnolia Bistro. Tony Russo was standing at the cash register and looked up at Vincent with open contempt. "You're that new guy Jack Romano asking for a job?" "Huh. Yes, sir," Vincent replied, trying to keep his voice humble. "I really need this job." Tony looked him up and down, his nose wrinkling as if he smelled something rotten. "You look useless. But fine, I'm short-handed. Minimum wage, no tips for the first week. Make mistakes and I dock your pay. Understand?" Vincent swallowed the anger rising in his throat and nodded. "I understand, sir." Tony threw him a wrinkled apron. "Go clean the toilets. Then take out the trash in the back. Only after that can you serve tables." Vincent took the apron and walked to the back of the restaurant. He had never cleaned a toilet in his life. He had never done anything with his own hands except hold a gun and sign death sentences. But today he knelt on the filthy bathroom floor, took a scrub brush, and began to work. The smell of chemicals stung his nose. His knees ached against the hard tiles, but he didn't stop. An hour later, as he was struggling with the heavy trash bins in the alley behind the restaurant, a familiar voice called out, "Hey, you're new, right?" Vincent turned and saw Scarlett standing in the back doorway, a trash bag in her hand. She frowned when she saw him trying to drag a bin that was too heavy. "Let me help you. Do you know the trick? Kick the bottom lightly, then pull. It makes it much easier." She stepped forward and showed him. Vincent copied her and the bin moved more easily. He looked at her. "Thank you. It's nothing." Scarlett smiled, though the dark circles under her eyes from the night before were still there. The first day is always the hardest. Tony likes to test new people by giving them the worst jobs. If you survive this week, things get easier. Or you quit like most people, she added with a bitter smile. Vincent looked at her, remembering the image of her crying on the step the night before. "What about you? How long have you been here?" 8 months, Scarlett answered. "Long enough to know how to avoid Tony and long enough to know this isn't my dream. But the tips here are decent, and I need every cent." She said it gently, without complaint, simply stating a fact. Vincent felt his chest tighten. How much she was carrying and still able to speak of it so calmly. They finished the trash together. Then Scarlett led him inside, showed him how to carry trays, how to take orders, how to remember table numbers. She was surprisingly patient, explaining every small detail without showing any annoyance. "The most important tip," she whispered, "is don't let Tony see you happy. He hates that. Keep your head down, work, and save your smile for the customers." Vincent couldn't help a soft laugh. "Sounds like a survival strategy." "Exactly," Scarlett laughed. "This place is a battlefield. The only problem is the enemy is your boss." At lunchtime, Vincent was finally allowed to serve tables. He was so clumsy he almost spilled coffee on a customer. His hands shook carrying the heavy trays. His feet ached from standing constantly. Every time he made a mistake, Tony appeared, scolding him in front of everyone. "Are you an idiot? Who taught you to carry trays like that? A 5-year-old could do better than you." Vincent clenched his teeth and endured it, the anger burning in his chest, but he forced it down. He looked at the other employees and saw them lower their heads, avoid looking, afraid. This was the life they had to endure every day. This was the life Scarlett had to endure, while also worrying about her sick mother, her younger sister, and the loan sharks. For the first time in his life, Vincent understood what helplessness felt like. He, the most powerful man in Chicago, was standing here being humiliated by a third-rate manager and couldn't do anything. But that helplessness showed him something more valuable. During the break, Scarlett shared half her sandwich with him. "I don't need it," Vincent said. "You do," she replied. "You didn't eat breakfast, I saw, and the afternoon is long. Trust me, you won't survive a day here without energy." Vincent took the sandwich and looked at her. It was just a cheap sandwich, but to him it was worth more than any lavish banquet he had ever attended, because it was shared by someone who had almost nothing and still chose to give. They sat in the kitchen corner eating in silence. Scarlett talked about her younger sister, Lily, 16 years old, in her final year of high school and dreaming of going to college. She spoke about wanting her sister to have a better life, not to struggle the way she had. Vincent listened, his heart aching with every word. "What about you?" Scarlett asked. "Do you have family?" Vincent was silent for a moment. "No," he said. "No one left." Scarlett looked at him, her green eyes softening. "I know that feeling," she said gently. "Sometimes loneliness is the hardest thing to endure." They looked at each other, and in that moment Vincent felt an invisible thread connecting them. Both were carrying burdens the world couldn't see. Both were trying to survive each day, The only difference was that he had chosen his burden, and she hadn't. 1 week passed and Vincent had begun to grow accustomed to the rhythm of Magnolia Bistro. He learned how to carry trays without spilling, memorized the table numbers, and most importantly learned how to avoid Tony when he was in one of his rages. But he wasn't here just to be a waiter. He watched, he listened, he remembered every smallest detail, and what he discovered made his blood boil. It started one late evening when Vincent volunteered to stay behind and clean up. Most of the staff had gone home, and only Tony was left in the back office. Vincent pretended to mop the floor near the office door, his ears straining to listen. Tony's voice came through the half-open door. Yes, this month 300,000. I've cleaned it all already. Mr. Castellano can rest assured. Vincent froze, his hand tightening on the mop. Castellano. The name cut into him like a knife. Dante Castellano, the boss of the rival family. The man who had tried to kill him 3 times in the past 5 years. The man he had sworn to wipe out completely. And now he discovered that Castellano's hunting dog was sitting inside his own restaurant. Tony went on. No one suspects a thing. The real owner never comes here anyway. He only looks at the reports and I control all the reports. Easy as candy. A sharp laugh followed, and then the call ended. Vincent stepped back and hid in the shadows. He understood everything. Tony wasn't just a bad manager. He was a spy, a traitor. He was using Vincent's restaurant to launder money for his enemy right under his nose. Over the following days, Vincent quietly gathered evidence. He slipped into the office when Tony was gone and photographed the ledger pages. The numbers didn't match. Reported revenue was 2 or even 3 times higher than reality. Fake invoices for parties that never happened, phantom supply orders, expenses that didn't exist. All of it was carefully fabricated. But what enraged Vincent most was when he discovered Tony was forcing the staff into this dirty game. One afternoon, he overheard Tony call Rosa, the gentle 50-year-old head cook, into the office. "Sign here," Tony ordered. "But Mr. Russo, this is a seafood invoice for $50,000. We never bought that much. Shut up and sign. Or do you want to lose your job? Do you know that no one hires old women?" There was a long silence, then the sound of a pen signing paper. Vincent clenched his fist so hard his nails cut into his palm. Rosa, the kind woman who secretly gave him extra food every lunch because she thought he was thin, was being forced into criminal activity. And she wasn't the only one. Vincent noticed the other staff showed the same signs. They were more afraid than normal. They avoided each other's eyes when Tony summoned them to the office. They signed papers they weren't allowed to read. All of them were hostages in Tony's game, trapped by the fear of losing their jobs, their only source of income to feed their families. One night, Vincent called Marco from the alley behind the restaurant. He told him everything he had discovered, his voice cold as ice. "Tony Russo is Castellano's man. He's laundering money inside my restaurant." "How much?" Marco asked, his voice tight. "By my calculations, at least $3 million over the past 8 months. And he's forcing the staff to sign fake invoices as cover." Marco swore. "I'll send people to take care of him tonight." "No," Vincent cut in. "Not yet. If we kill Tony now, Castellano will know we've found out. He'll cut all contact and we'll lose the trail. I need more time. I need to know who else Tony is connected to, what other lines there are." "Boss," Marco said worriedly, "you're playing with fire. The longer you stay there, the more dangerous it gets." Vincent looked toward the back door of the restaurant where Scarlett was stepping out after her shift. Her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. "I know," he said, "but some things are more important than my safety." Marco was silent for a moment. "The girl?" Vincent didn't answer, but his silence was the answer. "I understand," Marco sighed, "but boss, be careful. Castellano isn't a fool. If he finds out you're there, he won't miss the chance. And if he knows you care about someone, that person becomes a target." Vincent watched Scarlett's figure fade into the night. He knew Marco was right. He was pulling Scarlett into a dangerous world without her knowing it. But he couldn't stop. Not now. Not while she was still here, trapped under Tony's control, crushed by a harsh life. He would deal with Tony. He would destroy Castellano. And he would protect Scarlett whether she knew it or not. But first he had to wait. And in Vincent Moretti's world, waiting was sometimes harder than killing. Everything happened on a Friday night when the restaurant was packed and everyone was so busy that no one noticed anyone else. Tony sent Scarlett to fetch more napkins from the storage in the back, a shortcut that went through the narrow alley beside the restaurant. She was hurrying along when the sound of voices from the corner of the alley made her stop. "This is this month's share," Tony's voice said. 200,000 in cash. Tell Mr. Castellano everything is running smoothly." Scarlett pressed herself against the wall, her heart pounding. She hadn't meant to eavesdrop, but her feet felt nailed to the ground. Through the gap between the trash bins, she saw Tony handing a black briefcase to a man in a leather jacket. The man opened it, quickly counted the stacks of money inside, and nodded in satisfaction. "Very good, Russo. The boss is very pleased with your work. Keep it up and you'll be rewarded well." Tony grinned, the smile of a man betraying without a trace of regret. Scarlett took a step back, about to leave quickly, but her foot kicked an empty soda can. The clatter rang out in the quiet night like an alarm bell. "Someone's there," the man in the leather jacket barked, already drawing his gun. Tony spun around and caught sight of Scarlett trying to run. His eyes flared with fury. "Hayes!" Scarlett ran, her heart threatening to burst. She ran around to the back door, rushed into the crowded restaurant, trying to melt into the crowd. But she knew Tony had seen her. He knew she had witnessed everything. Half an hour later, as Scarlett was trembling while carrying a tray of drinks, Tony appeared beside her. He didn't shout. He didn't yell. He only whispered into her ear, his voice cold as ice. "Come to my office. Now." Scarlett wanted to refuse, wanted to run, but Tony's eyes told her that running would only make things worse. She set the tray down and followed him, her legs feeling like cotton. In the office, Tony closed the door and turned to her. "What did you see out there?" "I didn't see anything," Scarlett said, trying to keep her voice calm while panic screamed inside her. "I was just getting napkins." "Don't lie to me," Tony snarled, stepping close to her face. "I saw you standing there. I saw you run. You think I'm stupid?" Scarlett swallowed, her body trembling. "I swear I didn't see anything. I only heard voices and I got scared, so I ran. I don't know anything." Tony stared at her for a long moment, his narrow eyes trying to read whether she was telling the truth. Then he sneered, a smile without any warmth. "All right, I'll believe you. Once. But listen carefully, girl. If you dare say one word about what you saw or didn't see to anyone, including that Jack you like to talk to, then not only you but your mother in the hospital and your pretty little sister will have trouble. Do you understand?" Scarlett felt the blood in her veins freeze. He knew about her mother. He knew about Lily. "I understand," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Tony nodded in satisfaction. "Good. Now get out there and work. And remember, I have eyes everywhere." Scarlett left the office, her legs almost giving out. She went into the bathroom, locked the door, and cried without a sound. She didn't know what she had stumbled into, but she knew it was dangerous, very dangerous. Vincent saw Scarlett come out of Tony's office, her face white as paper. He saw her rush into the bathroom and knew something had happened. But he couldn't ask. Not now. That night when Scarlett left the restaurant, Vincent followed quietly. He kept his distance, hiding in the shadows, and he realized he wasn't the only one watching her. A man in a black jacket was following Scarlett from behind, about 50 meters away. He moved professionally, his steps light, his eyes never leaving his target. This wasn't a lone shark. This was Tony's man. Or worse, Castellano's. Vincent felt rage rise in his chest. The Mafia boss's instincts surged awake. He sped up, moving through dark alleys he had memorized on the nights he had followed Scarlett before. He cut ahead, circled around, and waited. The tail stepped into the dark alley, his eyes still fixed on Scarlett's distant figure. He didn't notice the shadow moving in from behind until it was too late. Vincent struck fast. A blow to the back of the neck made the man stagger. Before he could react, Vincent locked his arm around his throat and squeezed until he went unconscious. He searched the man's pockets and found a gun, a knife, and a phone. On the phone was a message from an unknown number. "Follow the girl Hayes. Report all movements. If she contacts anyone suspicious, deal with it." Vincent deleted the message, smashed the phone, then dragged the unconscious man into a dark corner of the alley. He called Marco. "Come to the alley between Oak Street and 7th Street. There's a package that needs to be cleaned up." "On my way," Marco replied. "Did he say anything?" "Not yet, but he will." Vincent looked towards Scarlett, stepping into her building, safe, unaware of what had just happened. "And Marco," he added, "increase protection. 24/7. No one gets near her." "Understood, boss." Vincent stood in the shadows, watching Scarlett's window until the light came on, then went out. She was safely home. He let out a long breath, but his heart was still pounding. Tonight he had protected her without her knowing, but he knew this was only the beginning. Tony had made his move, and Castellano wouldn't stop. A war was coming, and Scarlett Hayes, whether she wanted it or not, was already at the center of the storm. In the days after what happened with Tony, Scarlett changed. She became quieter, her smile appeared less often, and her eyes always held a hint of worry whenever she glanced toward the office door. Vincent noticed, and he began to stay close to her in the most subtle ways. He volunteered for extra hours whenever she worked late. He arranged to be assigned to tables near her section. He watched her when she wasn't looking, making sure she was all right. And slowly, those small moments became a habit neither of them spoke about, but both understood. One night after the restaurant closed, Scarlett sat alone at the corner table, her head bowed, her shoulders trembling. Vincent walked over and sat across from her without a word. She looked up, her eyes red. "You're not going home." "Not yet," he said gently. "You're not either." Scarlett gave a sad smile and wiped her tears quickly. "I just need a minute. Some days everything is too much, you know." "I know," Vincent said, his voice softer than ever. "Tell me about it, if you want." Scarlett looked at him for a long moment, as if deciding whether she could trust him. Then she sighed and began to speak. "My mother," she said, her voice catching. "The doctors say she doesn't have much time left. Maybe a few months, maybe a few weeks. They're not sure. Every day I go to the hospital, I'm afraid it'll be the last time I see her." Vincent was silent, his heart aching. He remembered the image of Scarlett by her mother's bed, trying to smile while her world was falling apart. "And the worst part," Scarlett continued, "is that I can't do anything. I don't have money for better treatments. I can only watch her slowly fade away and pretend everything will be all right. Every night I go home, I have to smile at Lily, tell her mom will get better. But I know it's a lie, and I hate myself for that." She stopped, tears running down her cheeks. Vincent reached out, hesitated for a second, then gently took her hand. Her hand was cold and small in his. "You're not lying," he said. "You're protecting your sister. That's what people who love each other do." Scarlett looked at his hand holding hers, but she didn't pull away. "What about you?" she asked softly. "Do you have family? You once said you have no one left." Vincent was quiet, his eyes darkening. It had been a long time since he had spoken of this to anyone. But looking at Scarlett, at the trust in her green eyes, he felt like sharing. "At least a part. My mother died when I was 12, he said, his voice low and distant. "She was the only one who truly loved me. She taught me how to cook, how to read, how to look at the world with curiosity instead of fear. Then one day, she was gone, and I lost everything." Scarlett squeezed his hand. "I'm sorry. That must have been so painful for a child." Vincent nodded, but he didn't tell the rest. He didn't say that his father had killed his mother in a drunken rage, that he had witnessed it all from the crack of a closet door, that he had sworn revenge and carried it out 10 years later. Those things were too dark, too brutal to speak aloud. He didn't want Scarlett to look at him with fear. "What did you do after that?" Scarlett asked. "How did you survive?" Vincent looked at her, a sad smile touching his lips. "I learned how to become strong. I built everything from nothing. I told myself I'd never let anyone hurt me again." He paused and looked into her eyes. "But sometimes strength also means loneliness." Scarlett nodded as if she understood exactly what he meant. They sat there in silence for a long time, their hands still joined, neither wanting to be the first to let go. Finally, Scarlett smiled, the first smile in days that truly reached her eyes. "Thank you, Jack. Thank you for listening to me. I don't know why, but when I'm with you, everything feels a little lighter." Vincent felt his heart stumble. She called him Jack, the false name, the unreal identity, and it hurt because he was lying to her every day. "Let me walk you home," he said, standing up. "It's late." Scarlett shook her head. "You don't have to. I'm used to walking alone." "I know," Vincent said, "but you don't have to be alone tonight." They left the restaurant together and walked through the late Chicago night. Scarlett talked about Lily, about her dream of going to college, about how she'd do anything to give her sister a better future. Vincent listened, sometimes asking questions, sometimes just walking beside her. When they reached Scarlett's building, she turned to him. "You know something, Jack," she said. "You're different from the men I've known." "Different how?" he asked carefully. Scarlett tilted her head, thinking, "I don't know. You seem like you're hiding something big. But at the same time, you're the most honest person I know." "It's strange, isn't it?" Vincent didn't answer. He couldn't, because she was right. He was hiding everything, and the honesty she felt was the only thing he wasn't pretending. "Good night, Scarlett," he said instead. "Good night, Jack." She smiled once more and went inside. Vincent stood there watching until she was gone. In his chest, something was changing. Something warm and frightening at the same time. He was falling in love. And that was the most dangerous thing Vincent Moretti had ever done. 3 days after that night, everything collapsed. Vincent was serving tables at lunch when Scarlett's phone rang. She looked at the screen and her face went pale in an instant. She dropped the tray she was holding. plates and glasses shattering on the floor. But she didn't notice. She just stood there trembling, one hand pressed to her ear. Yes, I understand. I'm coming right away. She hung up, her eyes empty as if her soul had left her body. Vincent stepped to her immediately. Scarlett, what happened? My mother, she whispered, her voice almost gone. My mother fainted. The hospital called. She's in the emergency room. I have to go. I have to go now. She turned to run, but her legs buckled. Vincent caught her in time. Let me take you. You can't drive like this. Tony appeared behind them, his face flushed red. Where do you think you're going, Hayes? Your shift isn't over. You think you can leave whenever you want. Vincent turned, his eyes cold as ice. Her mother is in the emergency room. She needs to go, Tony snarled. I don't care. If she walks out that door, she's fired. Vincent stepped close to Tony's face, his voice low and dangerous. She's going. And if you fire her for this, you'll regret it. Something in Vincent's eyes made Tony step back. He opened his mouth to say something but then closed it, turned away, and muttered to himself. Vincent took Scarlett's hand and led her outside. He called a taxi because he couldn't let her see Marco's car parked nearby. On the ride to the hospital, Scarlett sat in silence, staring out the window but not really seeing anything. Her lips moved as if in prayer. Vincent sat beside her, saying nothing, just holding her hand tightly. When they reached St. Mary's Hospital, Scarlett rushed inside like a storm. Vincent ran after her to the oncology ward where a doctor was waiting with a grave expression. Are you family of Margaret Hayes? Yes, I'm her daughter, Scarlett said breathlessly. How is my mother? The doctor sighed. She's stable, but the situation is very serious. The tumor has grown faster than we expected. She needs emergency surgery to remove it. Otherwise, she won't make it through the week. Scarlett clutched the doctor's sleeve. Then do the surgery. Please, do whatever is necessary. The doctor looked at her with compassion. The surgery is very complex and very expensive. The estimated cost is around $200,000, including aftercare and medication. Her insurance won't cover it. I need you to confirm the financial arrangements before we can proceed. Scarlett's face went white. 200,000. She repeated the number as if it were a foreign language. Yes, the doctor nodded. I know it's a large amount. You can speak to the finance office about options, but I have to be honest, time is very limited. The doctor left, leaving Scarlett standing like a statue. Vincent looked at her, his heart tightening painfully. $200,000. For him, it was what he could spend on a single dinner. For Scarlett, it was an unimaginable fortune. Scarlett, he began, but she stepped back, leaned against the wall, and slowly slid down to sit on the floor. 200,000, she whispered, staring into nothing. I don't have 200,000. I still owe over 12,000. And that's not even counting the interest that grows every hour. I work 16 hours a day, and it's still not enough to pay my mother's monthly bills. 200,000. What am I going to do? What am I going to do? And then she cried. Not the silent crying of before, but a broken sobbing. The crying of someone who had endured too much, and finally couldn't hold it in anymore. She hugged her knees, her body shaking, tears streaming down her face. Vincent knelt beside her and pulled her into his arms. She cried into his chest, her sobs echoing in the empty hallway. He said nothing, only held her tightly, one hand gently stroking her hair. In his mind, the decision had been made from the first second. He wouldn't let this happen. He wouldn't let her lose her mother because of money. 10 minutes later, when Scarlett had calmed a little and gone into her mother's room, Vincent stepped into the hallway, took out his phone, and called Marco. Marco, he said quietly, I need you to do something. Right now. What do you need, boss? Contact the charity fund we sponsor, the one for cancer patients. Transfer $250,000 to St. Mary's Hospital, designated for Margaret Hayes. Make sure it's completely anonymous. No one can know where the money came from. Understood, Marco replied immediately. It'll be done within 2 hours. Vincent hung up and looked through the glass into the room where Scarlett was sitting by her mother's bed, holding her hand and crying. He knew he couldn't tell her the truth. She wouldn't accept the money if she knew. She was too proud, too self-respecting for that. But he didn't care. He would protect her in his own way, whether she knew it or not, whether she wanted it or not. 2 hours later, a nurse entered the room with a surprised expression. Miss Hayes, there's good news. Your mother's surgery and treatment have been fully paid for. Scarlett looked up, her eyes swollen from crying. What? How? Who? An anonymous charity, the nurse said. They left no name. Only said they wanted to help cancer patients in need. Your mother was one of those selected. Scarlett looked at the nurse, then at her mother, then toward the door where Vincent was standing watching from a distance. She didn't understand what was happening. But for the first time in many months, she felt that maybe miracles really did exist. Vincent turned away, a faint smile touching his lips. It was the least he could do, and she would never know. 1 week after the surgery, Scarlett's mother had stabilized and was recovering well. But the relief didn't last long, because Tony noticed the change in Scarlett. She seemed less anxious, less bowed, and that unsettled him because he liked his employees afraid and broken, and he hated seeing hope in them. So one afternoon near the end of the shift, he called Scarlett into his office and told her to close the door. She did, unease rising in her chest, standing at a careful distance with her back near the door in case she had to run. Tony leaned back in his chair with his feet on the desk and looked at her like prey. He said he'd heard her mother had surgery paid for by some charity, and how lucky that was. Scarlett said nothing and only watched him cautiously. Then he reminded her she still owed Salvatore, $12,000 plus interest, now $15,000, and her wages barely covered food. So what was she going to do? Scarlett said she'd pay and only needed time. Tony laughed and stepped closer and said Salvatore wasn't patient, but he could help her and lend her the money with no interest. Scarlett asked what he wanted in return. He stepped so close she could smell smoke and alcohol and said slowly that she had to obey him and do whatever he told her. Anything. Then he lifted his hand and brushed her cheek. Scarlett recoiled into the door, while he said she understood what he meant and that she had no choice, and either she obeyed or Salvatore would deal with her mother and sister. Scarlett felt sick and wanted to cry and scream, but instead she looked straight at him and said no. Tony snarled, and she repeated no and said she'd rather die than let him touch her. And if he harmed her family, she'd go to the police and tell them everything she knew. Tony's face twisted with rage and he struck her, knocking her to the floor. Then he grabbed her hair and dragged her up, shouting that he'd teach her respect. Then the office door burst open, and Vincent stood there with eyes no longer belonging to Jack Romano but to Vincent Moretti, cold and lethal, telling Tony to let her go. Tony shouted at him, but Vincent moved too fast, twisted his wrist until it cracked, and struck him hard enough to throw him across the room, and warned him that if he ever touched her again, he'd bury him. Tony stared up in terror and asked who he was. Vincent caught himself and turned to Scarlett, whose cheek was swelling and whose eyes were full of shock and fear, and told her to leave. He helped her up and led her out, while Tony lay on the floor cursing. Outside, Scarlett stopped and asked how he'd done that so easily, and who he really was. Vincent said only that he was someone who couldn't watch her be hurt, and that was all she needed to know. Scarlett looked at him with doubt, but thanked him and walked into the night, leaving Vincent alone with his anger and his growing fear because she'd begun to suspect, and one day the truth would come out, and he could only hope she wouldn't look at him with disgust when it did, even though deep down he knew that hope was fragile. Scarlett didn't go home that night. She couldn't. Her hands were still shaking, her cheek was still swollen and burning, and in her mind the sound of Tony's slap and the image of Vincent taking him down in seconds kept echoing over and over. She was afraid to go home alone. She was afraid Tony would have someone follow her. She was afraid of everything. So when Vincent offered to take her to his apartment so she could rest, she agreed without hesitation. Jack Romano's apartment was on the 3rd floor of an old building, small but clean and warm, a place Marco had prepared with only the basic necessities so Vincent could live like an ordinary man, nothing luxurious, nothing that revealed who he really was. Scarlett sat on the worn sofa and hugged a pillow to her chest like a child seeking safety. Vincent made her a cup of hot tea and placed it gently in her hands. "Drink this," he said. "You need to rest." Scarlett took a sip and felt the warmth spread through her throat. Then she looked up and caught the worried look in his eyes. "You don't have to do all this for me," she said softly. "You don't owe me anything." "I know," Vincent replied as he sat beside her, "but I want to." "Why?" Scarlett asked, looking straight into his eyes. "Why do you care about me this much? We've only known each other for a few weeks. You barely know anything about me, and yet you're willing to fight the manager for me, willing to risk your job for me. Why?" Vincent was silent for a long time. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he'd been watching her long before they met, that he knew about her mother, her sister, her debt to Salvatore, everything. But he couldn't, because the lie had gone too far, and the truth would destroy what they had. "Because you're special," he finally said, his honesty hurting even as he spoke it. "From the first moment you looked at me and said I looked tired, I knew you were different from everyone I'd ever met. You're not afraid. You don't pretend. You see me. Really see me. Not just what I show on the surface. And that," he paused and took a slow breath, "that made it impossible for me to stop thinking about you." Scarlett set the tea down and turned fully toward him, her green eyes shining under the warm yellow light. "You know what?" she said, her voice light as breath. "I feel the same. I can't stop thinking about you either. At first I told myself it was just because you were kind to me, because you were the only person in that restaurant who treated me like a human being. But then I realized it wasn't only that. She hesitated, searching for the right words. I feel safe with you, she continued. And I haven't felt safe with anyone in a very long time. I don't know who you are. I don't know where you come from. And I know you're hiding something from me. But strangely, that doesn't scare me. The only thing that scares me is that one day you'll disappear and I'll be alone again like before. Vincent felt his heart tighten painfully. She trusted him even knowing he was hiding something. She opened herself to him even knowing he wasn't fully honest. And that made him feel more guilty than anything he'd ever done. Scarlett, he said, his voice rough. You shouldn't trust me this much. I don't deserve it. Why? She asked, tilting her head. Because I've done terrible things, Vincent said, his eyes darkening. I'm not a good man. I've done things you'd be disgusted by if you knew. I don't deserve your trust, your care, or anything you give me. Scarlett looked at him for a long moment, then lifted her hand and gently touched his cheek. Her touch warm and soft. I don't believe that, she said. I look into your eyes and I don't see a bad man. I see someone who's hurting, someone who's trying, someone who may have made mistakes but is still trying to make things right. I don't know what you did in the past, but I know how you treat me now, and that's all that matters to me. Vincent looked into her eyes and saw sincerity, trust, and something else he didn't dare to name. He knew he should stop. He knew he should tell her the truth and let her decide. But in that moment, his reason faded, and only his heart remained, beating hard in his chest, and he leaned down and kissed her. Their lips met, gentle at first, then deeper, more intense, and Scarlett wrapped her arms around his neck and pulled him closer, the kiss lasting as if time had stopped, as if the world outside no longer existed. When they parted, they were both breathing fast, and Scarlett looked at him with her lips slightly swollen from the kiss and her eyes shining. I don't know where this leads, she whispered, but I want to try. I want to believe I deserve happiness, even if only once. Vincent pulled her into his arms, his chin resting on the top of her head, feeling her warmth, the faint scent in her hair, her heart beating quickly against his chest, and he felt happy, a fragile and frightening happiness. I won't leave you, he said softly, full of promise. I promise. But even as he said it, he knew he was lying, because sooner or later the truth would come out, and when it did, she would leave him whether he wanted it or not. That night, they talked until dawn, about dreams, fears, small hopes, and Scarlett fell asleep in his arms with a peaceful expression, for the first time since they'd met, and Vincent watched her sleep and knew he was in love, truly, fiercely, enough to risk everything. But that love was built on a lie, and lies always collapse in the end. Everything unraveled 2 days after that night, when Tony, his arm in a cast and his heart full of hatred, reported everything to Dante Castellano. He told him about the waiter named Jack Romano, about the way he'd struck him like a trained professional, about the cold eyes and voice that didn't belong to any ordinary worker, and he sent along a secret photograph of Vincent serving tables. Dante Castellano looked at the photo and laughed loudly, the sound echoing through his luxurious mansion. Vincent Moretti, he said to the men standing around him, the most powerful boss in Chicago pretending to be a waiter in his own restaurant. Unbelievable. And he's even fallen in love with a poor waitress. He stood and walked to the window overlooking the city and said this was a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, because Vincent had let his guard down and grown weak from love, and they would take advantage of that. Then he turned back to Tony, who was trembling in the corner, and ordered him to take the girl and bring her to the warehouse at the harbor, and then call Vincent and tell him that if he wanted to see her alive, he had to come alone. That night, Scarlett was locking the back door of the restaurant after a late shift and smiling as she thought about Vincent and their kiss and the promises he had made. For the first time in many years, she felt hope for the future. She didn't hear the footsteps behind her. She didn't have time to react when a large hand covered her mouth and dragged her into the darkness. She struggled and tried to scream, but a cloth pressed over her nose made the world spin and then fade. When Scarlett woke, she found herself on the cold concrete floor of an abandoned warehouse. Her hands and feet tied, her mouth taped shut, the smell of damp rot and machine oil making her feel sick. She looked around, trying to understand what was happening, and saw Tony a few meters away with his arm in a cast and a cruel smile on his face. Beside him stood 3 large men with guns at their backs, their eyes cold as they looked at her like an object. Awake now, Tony said with pleasure. Do you know where you are? You're in the hands of the Castellano family, the enemies of your lover, and do you even know who your lover really is? Scarlett stared at him, her eyes wide with fear and defiance. Tony laughed and said Jack Romano, the unemployed waiter you kiss every night, is actually Vincent Moretti, the most powerful mafia boss in Chicago. The man who has killed hundreds, the man who rules this city from the shadows. Didn't you know? Did you think he was a prince on a white horse coming to save you? He was just playing you. Scarlett felt as if someone had struck her in the chest, because she had heard that name and everyone in Chicago knew it. The infamous Mafia boss whose name people only whispered. And Jack, the man she trusted and loved, was him, and tears filled her eyes, not from fear but from betrayal. Meanwhile, Vincent was waiting outside the restaurant as he did every night, but Scarlett didn't appear. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15, and worry set in. He called her, but there was no answer. He ran inside, searching everywhere, but she was gone. Then his phone rang with an unknown number, and Dante Castellano's cold voice said, "Vincent Moretti, it's been a while. I hear you like being a waiter these days." Vincent felt his blood turn cold and demanded what he had done. Dante laughed and said, "Your girl is with me. And if you want to see her alive, come to the warehouse at Harbor number 7 alone within 1 hour. And if I see anyone else, she dies." Then the call ended. Vincent stood there, shaking with rage because he'd been careless and distracted by love, and now Scarlett was paying for his mistake. He called Marco and told him to gather everyone and everything and go to Harbor number 7 within 45 minutes, because Castellano had Scarlett. When Marco warned that Castellano said to come alone, Vincent said he didn't care, and that if Castellano wanted war, he'd get war, and Vincent would burn all of Chicago if he had to bring her back. Then Vincent stepped into the night with eyes no longer belonging to Jack Romano, the gentle, loving waiter, but to Vincent Moretti, the ruthless boss who wouldn't hesitate. "Wait for me, Scarlett," he whispered into the dark. "I'm coming to save you, and anyone who dared to touch you will beg to die." 40 minutes later, Harbor number 7 lay in darkness. The abandoned warehouses stood still like enormous ghosts. The smell of sea salt and machine oil drifted through the cold air. Vincent stood in the shadows, his eyes scanning every hidden corner. Beside him were Marco and 20 men of the Moretti family, all heavily armed and ready for war. "Castellano has 15 men inside," Marco said quietly through his earpiece. "Scarlett is being held on the 2nd floor on the eastern side. Tony Russo is with her." Vincent nodded, his eyes cold as ice. "Group 1 go around the back. Group 2 follow me through the front entrance. The objective is Scarlett. Anyone in the way is taken out without question. Tony Russo is mine." The teams moved in silence like shadows. Vincent led the main group with a gun in his hand that felt cold and familiar. He hadn't held a gun in weeks. He'd tried to live like a normal man, but tonight he was back to who he really was. And who he really was a killer. The first shot rang out when a guard spotted them. Then chaos exploded. Bullets tore through the air. There were shouts and cries and bodies hitting the concrete floor. Vincent moved like a killing machine, and every shot found its mark. He didn't hesitate, and he didn't feel mercy, because in his mind there was only one thought: Scarlett. He had to save her at any cost. The firefight lasted 10 minutes, though. To Vincent, it felt like a lifetime. When the last gunshot faded, the warehouse floor was soaked in blood and bodies. 12 of Castellano's men were down. 3 of Vincent's were wounded, but none were dead. Vincent ran up the stairs with Marco close behind. He kicked open the door to the 2nd floor and froze at what he saw. Scarlett was sitting on the floor with her hands and feet tied to an iron pillar. Her face was covered in bruises. Her lips were swollen and bleeding. Her shirt was torn at one shoulder. But what stopped Vincent's heart was her eyes. Those green eyes no longer looked at him with trust and love. They looked at him with horror, disgust, and something broken. Tony stood beside her with a gun to her head and his casted arm shaking. "Don't come any closer," he screamed in panic. "I'll shoot her. I swear I will." Vincent stood still with his gun raised at Tony. His voice was flat and cold. "If you shoot her, I won't kill you right away. I'll keep you alive and torture you every day until you beg to die, and I won't let you die. I'll keep you alive in pain for the rest of your life." Tony looked into Vincent's eyes and saw the truth. He saw death, cruelty, and something even worse than hell. His hands began to shake and the gun trembled, but instead of surrendering, he laughed wildly and turned to Scarlett and shouted, "Do you hear that? This is your lover, Vincent Moretti, the most infamous mafia boss in Chicago, the man who has killed hundreds, the man who tortures people to death. Did you think he loved you? He was just playing with you. You're just his toy." "Enough!" Vincent roared and fired. The bullet tore through Tony's shoulder. He screamed and dropped the gun. Marco rushed in, kicked the weapon away, and pinned Tony to the floor. Vincent ran to Scarlett and knelt in front of her. His hands were shaking as he untied her, and his heart was breaking as he saw her injuries. "Scarlett," he said softly, "are you hurt? Let me take you to the hospital." Scarlett said nothing and only stared at him with tears filling her eyes. When he reached to touch her, she flinched as if he were a venomous snake. "Don't touch me," she said, her voice shaking but firm. "Don't ever touch me again." "Scarlett, Vincent begged. I can explain. It's not what you think, not what I think. She laughed bitterly through tears. So you're not Vincent Moretti. You're not a mafia boss. You haven't killed people. Is everything he said a lie? Vincent opened his mouth, but no words came. He couldn't lie to her anymore. Not now. Not after everything. I am, he said finally in pain. I'm Vincent Moretti, and I've killed people. Many people. I'm not a good man. I never was. Scarlett closed her eyes as if that confirmation were the final knife in her heart. When she opened them, everything had changed. There was no love left. No hope. Only a cold emptiness. She stood up unsteadily and pushed Vincent's hand away when he tried to help her. I don't need you, she said. Each word a bullet in his heart. I don't need a killer to save me. I don't need your lies. I don't need anything from you ever again. She walked away, stumbling and hurting, but still walking. She didn't look back even once. Vincent knelt there, watching her disappear into the night. Around him were bodies and the thick smell of blood. This was his world. This was who he really was. And the only woman who had ever made him feel human was gone forever. Marco came to stand beside him and put a hand on his shoulder but said nothing. There was nothing to say. Vincent Moretti, the most powerful boss in Chicago, had won the battle that night, but he had lost the most precious thing of all. And that was the greatest defeat of his life. Vincent ran after Scarlett out of the warehouse. She was stumbling along the road toward the harbor, her legs shaking, her body still aching from Tony's blows. But she didn't stop. She kept walking, as if stopping would make her collapse completely. Scarlett, Vincent called, hurrying to her side. Please let me take you to the hospital. You're hurt. You need care. Scarlett stopped and turned to look at him. In the dim light of the street lamps, her face, covered in bruises, looked even more painful. But it was her eyes that tore Vincent apart from the inside. Don't say my name like that, she said, each word like a knife in his heart. You don't have that right. You never did. Scarlett, he begged. I said don't say my name, she shouted, her voice breaking. I'm not your Scarlett. I never was. This was all a lie. From beginning to end, it was all just a sick game by a bored mafia boss. No, Vincent said, his voice thick with pain. It wasn't like that. I never meant to deceive you. I went to the restaurant to see what was going on, and then I met you, and everything changed. I didn't mean to love you. I didn't mean to let it go this far, but I did love you, truly, and I didn't know how to stop. Scarlett laughed, a bitter, wounded sound. Love. You say you love me. A killer says he loves. That's almost funny. Do you even know what love is, Vincent? Or whatever name you're using. Love is truth. Love is trust. Love can't be built on lies. You looked into my eyes every day and told me you were Jack Romano, an unemployed man looking for work. You listened to me talk about my mother, my sister, my pain, and you kept lying. You kissed me, held me, promised you wouldn't leave me, while knowing it was all false. Is that love? Is that how you love someone? Vincent had no words. Every excuse was meaningless against the pain in her eyes. He knew he was wrong from the start, and he couldn't undo it. And the hospital money for my mother, Scarlett continued, her voice trembling. The anonymous charity. That was you too, wasn't it? Vincent said nothing, and that silence was the answer. Scarlett nodded as tears ran down her face. Of course it was you. I wondered why a miracle like that would happen. Turns out there are no miracles. Just the money of a mafia boss trying to buy the feelings of a poor waitress. I didn't buy you, Vincent said painfully. I only wanted to help you. I couldn't watch you suffer and do nothing. Help, Scarlett repeated as if the word tasted bitter. You helped me with money earned from killing, from smuggling, and God knows what else. Do you think I want that money? Do you think I'd thank you for using dirty money to save my mother? She stepped closer, her eyes burning through tears. I'd rather let my mother die than take anything from a murderer like you. Do you hear me? I'd rather die than owe you anything. The words struck Vincent like bullets to the heart. He stood there unable to argue, unable to defend himself. Because she was right. He was a killer. His money was dirty. And no matter how much he loved her, that wouldn't change who he was. I only want to ask you one thing, Scarlett said, her voice suddenly soft, and that softness hurt more than her anger. The moments between us, the nights we talked, the times you shared your childhood and your pain, that kiss, were any of those real? Or were they all just part of the game? Vincent looked into her eyes and wanted to say it was all real, that he'd truly opened himself to her, truly shared things he'd never told anyone, that his love for her was the only thing that wasn't false in all those weeks. But he couldn't say it, because he didn't know if it was enough. Because even if his feelings were real, the ground they grew on was a lie. He came to her under another name, another life, another truth. And how could he call his love real when he hadn't even dared to tell her who he was? His silence stretched on, and with each second, Scarlett understood more. Her tears fell silently, and she just stood there looking at him with dead eyes. "I understand now," she said at last, her voice empty. "Goodbye, Vincent Moretti. Thank you for teaching me what it feels like to be betrayed by the one you trust the most. I'll never forget this lesson." She turned and walked away. This time she didn't stumble. She walked steadily, as if the pain itself had given her strength. Vincent wanted to run after her, to take her hand, to say he was sorry, and he'd do anything to be forgiven, but his feet were rooted to the ground, and he only stood there watching her grow smaller and smaller until she disappeared into the night. Marco came to his side and put a hand on his shoulder and said they should go. Vincent didn't answer. He kept staring into the darkness where Scarlett had vanished, and inside his chest his heart was breaking apart piece by piece, because he'd built his empire on the blood and tears of others, and tonight he was paying with his own. Scarlett disappeared from Chicago the next day. She didn't return to Magnolia Bistro, didn't clear out her locker, didn't say goodbye to Rosa or anyone else. She simply vanished as if she'd never existed. She took her mother and Lily to a small town on the outskirts, rented a cheap apartment, and found work as a waitress in a modest diner. A new life began, but it wasn't easier. Every night, after Lily had fallen asleep and her mother was resting, Scarlett sat alone by the window and cried. She cried for the betrayal. She cried for the lies, but what hurt her most was that she cried because she missed him. She missed Jack's smile when he first learned how to carry a tray. She missed the gentleness in his eyes when he listened to her talk about her mother. She missed the warmth of his arms on the night they first kissed. She hated herself for still remembering those things. She hated herself because part of her still loved him, even knowing who he was, even knowing what he'd done. She wondered if she was broken for still feeling something for a killer. Meanwhile, in Chicago, Vincent Moretti was turning into a monster. After the night Scarlett left, he was no longer the man who smiled at her jokes. He became the cold, ruthless, terrifying boss he'd always been. He poured all his pain into rage, and that rage was aimed directly at the Castellano family. Within a week, Vincent destroyed nearly all of Dante Castellano's forces. He showed no mercy, offered no negotiations, gave no one a chance to surrender. Everyone involved in Scarlett's kidnapping died, one by one, in ways that made even Marco shudder. Tony Russo was the last. Vincent didn't kill him quickly. He kept him alive for 5 days, long enough for him to beg for death, long enough to pay for every bruise on Scarlett's face. And when Tony was finally released from life, he'd lost everything that made him human. Dante Castellano fled Chicago, but Vincent found him in a small town in Mexico. Their final meeting took place in an abandoned house with no witnesses and no survivors except Vincent. And when Vincent walked out, the Castellano empire no longer existed. But the victory brought him no joy. Every night he sat alone in his vast penthouse with a drink in his hand, looking out over the city he ruled, thinking about Scarlett, about the green eyes that once looked at him with love, about the smile that once made his heart soften, wondering where she was, whether she was safe, whether she was happy. He knew Marco was watching over her from afar to keep her safe, but he never asked for details because he was afraid that if he knew too much, he wouldn't be able to stop himself from going to her, and she'd made herself clear that she didn't want to see him again. 2 months after that fateful night, Margaret Hayes passed away. She died in her sleep, peacefully and without pain, and Scarlett held her mother's hand through the final night and listened to her last words. "My daughter," Margaret whispered, her voice weak but full of love. "I know you're carrying a great pain in your heart. I don't know what happened, but I see you cry every night, and I see the sadness in your eyes." "Mom," Scarlett choked. "Don't say anything," Margaret interrupted gently, squeezing her daughter's hand. "I just want to tell you one thing. Learn to forgive my daughter, not because the other person deserves it, but because you deserve to be free. Hatred only keeps you imprisoned in pain. Forgiveness is what sets you free." Scarlett cried as her tears fell onto her mother's thin hand. "But Mom, what if that person has done something unforgivable?" "There's nothing that can't be forgiven." Margaret smiled weakly. "Only hearts that aren't ready to forgive. I believe you'll find peace, my daughter. I believe you'll be happy." And then she closed her eyes and never opened them again. Margaret's funeral was simple on a rainy day with only Scarlett, Lily, and a few kind neighbors. No relatives, no crowds, only those who truly loved her. But when Scarlett arrived at the cemetery, she froze before a massive white wreath beside her mother's grave. Pure white lilies so expensive she knew she could never afford them. No sender's name, no card. Only a small handwritten line saying, "Please let her rest in peace. Her daughter is the most extraordinary person I've ever met." And Scarlett read that line again and again with tears running down her face because she knew who it was from and who had written those words. And in that moment between rain and tears, she remembered her mother's words. Learn to forgive. She didn't know if she could forgive yet. But for the first time in 2 months, she allowed herself to think of Vincent without only hatred. And for the first time, she wondered whether everything had been a lie, or whether there had been some truth in it after all. 1 week after the funeral, Scarlett received a letter. There was no return address. There was no stamp. There was only her name written in a firm but careful hand on the white envelope. She knew immediately who it was from. She wanted to tear it up and throw it away without reading it. But her hands didn't obey her. She sat by the window where she cried every night and opened the envelope. Inside were 5 handwritten pages in dark blue ink with steady letters as if each word had been weighed. Scarlett, the letter began. I'm not asking you to forgive me because I don't have the right to ask that. I only want you to know the truth. The whole truth. The things I should have told you long ago but was too cowardly to say. You asked me whether the moments between us were real. I couldn't answer you that night. Not because the answer was no, but because I didn't know how to make you believe me. But now that you're far away and I've got nothing left to lose, I'll tell you everything. I was born into a Mafia family. My father was a brutal boss, and my mother was a gentle woman forced into an arranged marriage. She loved me more than anything, and I loved her the same. She was the only light in my dark childhood. Then one night when I was 12, my father came home drunk. I heard shouting and crashing and my mother crying. I was afraid and hid in the closet and watched through the crack. I saw my father strangle my mother. I saw her struggle and claw and then go still. I saw the light leave her eyes and I couldn't do anything. I was only a 12-year-old child trembling in the dark, watching the person I loved most being killed in front of me. After that night I changed. I learned to hide my feelings, to be strong, to trust no one. I swore I'd never be weak again. And when I was 18, I was strong enough to kill my father. I don't regret that. It was the first time I killed, but not the last. I built my empire on blood and bone, on fear and power. I became what I hated most, a monster like my father. And for nearly 20 years, I lived that way. Cold, ruthless, unable to believe in love or allow myself to love anyone. Then I met you. I came to Magnolia Bistro, only to see why the restaurant was failing. I had no other plan. But you looked at me and said I looked tired, and those 3 simple words changed everything. You were the first person who truly saw me. Not the boss, not the killer, but the man inside. You weren't afraid of me even when you didn't know who I was. You treated me like a normal person, and I'd forgotten what that felt like. I started watching you not for any dark reason, but because I couldn't stop thinking about you. I saw you run to the hospital every night to see your mother, work yourself to exhaustion, cry alone in the late hours. I saw you threatened by loan sharks, humiliated by Tony every day, yet still standing tall, still smiling, still not breaking, and I loved you. I loved you before I even knew it. I loved your strength, your humor, the light in your eyes even when life tried to extinguish it. I loved the way you saw the world, the way you treated people, the way you believed in goodness even when everything around you was dark. Disguising myself as a waiter was the craziest thing I've ever done, but I wanted to be close to you. I wanted you to look at me with ordinary eyes, not with the fear everyone else had for me. I wanted to be Jack Romano, an unemployed man with no bloody past, allowed to love you without the weight of my sins. That was selfish. I know it was. I was selfish not to tell you the truth. I was afraid that if you knew who I was, you'd see me as a monster. I was afraid of losing you before I even had you. And because of that fear, I hurt you more than if I'd told you the truth from the beginning. But Scarlett, I swear to you my feelings were never false. The nights I listened to you talk about your mother and Lily and your dreams, I truly listened. The times I shared my childhood and my pain with you were things I'd never told anyone in nearly 2 decades. Our kiss, the night you slept in my arms, the promise I wouldn't leave you. All of it was real. Real enough that I was ready to give up my empire to be with you. Real enough that I'd die to protect you. I'm not writing this to ask you to come back because I know I don't deserve that. I only want you to know that in my life of darkness, you were the only light. You saved my soul, even if only for a short time, and whether you forgive me or not, I'll always be grateful for that. If you want me to disappear, I will disappear. You'll never have to see me again, or hear about me again. I'll protect you from afar silently for the rest of my life, because that's the only thing I can do for you now. But if only if you can forgive me. If you still believe everyone deserves a second chance like you once said, I'll be here. I'll wait for you even if I have to wait my whole life. Forever yours, Vincent. Scarlett finished the letter with tears soaking all 5 pages. She sat in the darkness, holding it to her chest, and cried like she never had before. She cried for his pain, for her own pain, for the love she still carried for him even though she'd tried to bury it. And that night, for the first time in so many months, she thought about going back. 1 month passed. Scarlett read Vincent's letter every night until the folds in the paper softened, and she knew every line by heart. She reread the part where he wrote about the night his mother was killed, about the 12-year-old child trembling in a closet watching the person he loved most die before his eyes. She reread the part where he confessed that he loved her before he even realized it, that he was willing to give up his empire just to be with her. And every time she cried, no longer with tears of hatred, but with the tears of someone trying to understand, trying to forgive, trying to find herself again. Her mother's words echoed in her mind each night, telling her to learn to forgive not because the other person deserved it, but because she deserved to be free. And she thought about Vincent and who he truly was. A killer, yes. A man who had done terrible things, yes. But also a boy who lost his mother. A man who had been alone for 19 years. A man who cried when he heard her speak about her pain. Jack, who shared half his sandwich with her when she was hungry. The man who hit Tony to protect her. The man who quietly paid her mother's hospital bills without asking for anything. He was all of that, both light and darkness, and she had to ask herself whether she could accept all of it, whether she was strong enough to love someone with all their scars and sins. One morning, when Lily had gone to school and the apartment was quiet, Scarlett stood in front of the mirror and looked at herself for a long time and saw a 27-year-old woman with sad eyes and invisible scars on her heart, but also with a strength she hadn't known she had. She had survived everything. She had lost her mother, her love, her trust. But she was still standing, and she didn't want to live the rest of her life in hatred and regret, so she decided to return to Chicago. Not to forgive, not yet, but to face it. To look into Vincent's eyes one more time and search for answers to the questions that still tormented her. She sent Lily to stay with a close friend, promising to return in a few days, and took a bus back to the city she had fled. When she walked into Magnolia Bistro, she almost didn't recognize it. The walls were newly painted, the furniture replaced, the air no longer heavy with fear. And Rosa, the head cook, saw her and cried out, "Scarlett," and ran to hug her, weeping and saying how much she'd missed her. Rosa told her that after she left, everything had changed. Tony had disappeared. No one knew where he'd gone. The real owner, Mr. Moretti, came every day. He fired the bad ones. He raised their pay. He fixed the place. But mostly he sat at the corner table Scarlett used to serve and stared at the door, waiting. Rosa whispered that he'd been waiting for months without asking anyone to find her. Just waiting. Scarlett felt tears rise in her eyes and walked toward the office and opened the door and saw Vincent sitting behind the desk. Not working. Just staring into nothing with empty, tired eyes. Thinner than before. Unshaven. Dark circles under his eyes. Looking like a man who hadn't slept in months. When he looked up and saw her, his eyes widened. He stood too quickly. He stopped, as if afraid she would vanish. Whispering her name. Scarlett saw how worn he looked, but she didn't run to him. She said only that he'd promised he would wait, and asked if he truly meant it. He said he would wait however long it took, even a lifetime. She told him she'd read his letter dozens of times, and didn't know what to do or whether she could forgive or love him, but she knew she didn't want to live in hatred, and she was trying. She came not because she'd forgiven him, but because she wanted to see if she could. Vincent's tears fell then, as he said that was all he needed, just a chance to prove himself. And Scarlett stood there watching the most powerful man in Chicago cry before her, and knew that whatever came next, she had made the right choice to return, because only by facing the past could she move forward. Scarlett agreed to stay, but with one condition. She wanted to know everything. No secrets, no concealment, no half-truths. She wanted to know who Vincent Moretti truly was, what he had done, and how he ran his empire. If she was going to love a mafia boss, she would do it with her eyes open, not in the darkness of deception. Vincent agreed. He told her everything, the most brutal things, the darkest secrets, the sins he would carry for the rest of his life. There were nights when Scarlett cried after listening to him. There were days when she needed to be alone to think, but she didn't leave. She stayed, facing each truth one by one, slowly learning to accept the man he truly was, with all his light and all his darkness. 6 months passed. Vincent kept his promise and began to withdraw from the most violent operations of the family, gradually handing them over to Marco and focusing on legitimate businesses. He couldn't become a clean man overnight, but he was trying. Every day, he tried to become a man more worthy of Scarlett's love. Magnolia Bistro was rebuilt from the ground up. Vincent made Scarlett an official partner not because of love, but because she deserved it. She had vision, creativity, and a way of connecting with people he never had. Scarlett redesigned the entire menu, adding dishes named after moments from their story. Forgiveness chicken because everyone deserves a second chance. Reconciliation, risotto rich and comforting the way things should be, truth cake sweet but honest, and new beginning steak grilled to perfection at last. Each dish had a story, and customers loved that. Lily was accepted into university with a full scholarship, one Scarlett knew the source of, but didn't refuse this time, because she had learned that sometimes accepting help isn't weakness, but allowing those who love you to express that love in their own way. On the opening night of the new restaurant, Magnolia Bistro was full. Food critics, local business owners, loyal customers who had followed the restaurant's journey were all there. Rosa stood in the kitchen, proudly watching perfect plates go out. The new staff worked with smiles, no longer ruled by fear as they had been under Tony. Near the end of dinner, Vincent stood and took the microphone. He thanked the guests for coming, thanked the staff for their hard work, thanked Rosa for staying even after knowing the truth about him. And then he looked at Scarlett, who stood near the bar in surprise. 1 year ago, he said, his voice filling the silent room, I walked into this restaurant wearing a mask. I pretended to be someone else and lived a life that wasn't mine. Then I met a girl who saw through me with 3 simple words. You look tired. He stepped down and walked toward Scarlett as all eyes followed them. She taught me that success without heart is meaningless. She taught me that truth, no matter how painful, is better than lies. She taught me that real love is accepting someone with all their flaws and still choosing to stay. Vincent stopped in front of Scarlett and slowly went down on one knee. Scarlett raised her hand to her mouth as tears began to fall. He took out a small black velvet box and opened it, revealing a simple but shining diamond ring. Scarlett Hayes, he said softly, his voice trembling. You saved my soul. You gave me a reason to become better. You loved me knowing who I was, and that's the greatest miracle I've ever received. I don't deserve you and I know that, but I'll spend my whole life trying to. Will you marry me? The room was so silent that the candles could be heard burning. Scarlett looked down at Vincent, the most powerful man in Chicago, kneeling before her with hope and fear in his eyes. She remembered everything they had been through. The lies, the betrayal, the pain, but also the long nights of talking, the gentle kisses, and a love that had survived the darkness. On one condition, she said, her voice trembling with a smile forming on her lips. I get to choose the wedding menu. The room exploded with laughter and applause. Vincent stood, slid the ring onto her finger, and kissed her as cheers filled the room. That night, they danced their first waltz as fiancés. Scarlett rested her head against Vincent's chest and whispered, Who would have thought? A waitress and a mafia boss. Vincent smiled, a former waitress. Now you're the head chef, business partner, and my future wife. And what are you? Scarlett asked. The luckiest man in the world, Vincent replied, kissing her forehead. And I'll spend my whole life proving it. They danced in candlelight, surrounded by the people they loved. Magnolia Bistro was no longer just a restaurant. It was the place where 2 lost souls found each other and found home. Their story reminds us that no one is perfect, and a person's past doesn't define their future. Forgiveness isn't forgetting what happened. It's choosing not to let the past control the present. True love is seeing both the light and the darkness in someone and choosing to stay. If this story touched your heart, please like and share this video with the people you love. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss more stories like this. How did this story make you feel? Could you forgive someone the way Scarlett did? Leave a comment below because we'd truly love to hear what's in your heart. Thank you for being with us. We wish you and your family strength, happiness, and peace every day. Goodbye and see you in the next video.